Hi everybody. So sorry about that. If you did join the previous live, but for some reason it wasn't showing up with my video. But retrying this again, and hopefully those of you who did want to join are able to find this link. So if you end up watching the replay, just let me know #replay, and of course share any questions. If you are joining me right now, feel free to ask questions live in the session. And I guess I'm going to start all of this all over again. But what I wanted to talk about today is supply chain stewardship and really taking responsibility of your supply chain in this journey of resetting our supply chains. And I guess the question is, why is this important? But the first question we probably need to understand to ask ourselves is, what is stewardship? What does that really mean? And the idea of stewardship is really around taking responsibility and accountability for our supply chains and being able to take that entire whole system responsibility, and not just for the fact that we produce and then sell a product or a service, but actually how did that product come to being? Where were the raw materials sourced out of? How are they sourced? How are they then processed? And then once they've been sold to the customer, what then happens to the product once it's been used? Does it go to landfill, or does it come back into the system, or can it be recycled, upcycled? All of those good things. So stewardship is about taking entire responsibility and accountability for that product or that service that you offer into the market. Because if you're part of benefiting as a business from developing that product, then it's your responsibility as well as a business to take complete stewardship. I think I like to find better words than just responsibility and accountability, but they're eluding me right now. So these are the words that I have for you, and hopefully that explanation really covers it. But I do feel like stewardship is probably much more. It's much more complete. Well, it's a much more complete system, in a way, like a parent-child relationship. It's that entire ownership, essentially, of the product or the service that you bring into the market. So what I wanted to say is, right now, and especially, I guess, COVID being a great example of how supply chains can get disrupted so quickly, this idea of resetting our supply chains is something that has come about in the more recent years. And I think things like the global financial crisis, of course, which really impacted so many businesses all around the world. This idea of being able to have a stable, robust, resilient supply chain is really important. And of course, there's so many pressures now increasing, not just these end game events like COVID or the global financial crisis or many others that have been that final ball dropping and us going, okay, what do we do now? How do we survive this big change? It's about how do we create this resilience? How do we build in that low risk profile and build in that resilience into our current supply chain so that they're ready to take on those changes as they arise, rather than trying to play catch up in the midst of all of it, in the midst of the chaos, really. It's much easier to make better decisions from a place of calm and better perception and clear view, having that foresight early on, rather than trying to do it when you're, amidst all of the chaos, essentially. So really, I guess it's important to understand what are the pressures that we're seeing that are causing us to think about resetting our supply chain. And I guess some of those things are around, inflation and the change in the market, costs of products and raw materials, and the cost to sell the products, distribute the products, sell them, all of those things, obviously process them, make them. So there's inflation along different parts in the entire value chain, and us thinking about that's very important. And of course, that uncertainty around raw materials, which I mentioned when I went live earlier, which is those raw materials and the availability is changing all the time, not only because of raw material scarcity, but also because the climate is changing. And so the availability of raw materials, especially obviously if they are organic. The availability of them changes throughout the year, often for most organic materials, and not just their availability because of the climate shift, but also, say, sudden climate adverse events that might impact a particular location where that raw material is sourced will obviously impact the supply chains that area slash that raw material feed into. So it's an entire system of thinking. And look, I do apologize. I know that my video has paused on my face in a funny and vulnerable position, but or vulnerable facial expression. But I think that hopefully you can still hear what I'm saying, and it's all still making sense to you. If you have any questions, as I said, just let me know in the comments. But what I wanted to say is there are a lot of pressures on supply chain, and the uncertainty from the geopolitical, the ESG pressures, the local landscape pressures, obviously from the changing environment. All of these things are starting to rethink supply chain models, and how can we move away from what is typically a linear, low-cost supply chain, which now we haven't really chosen this, but they have become multi-dimensional networks, not just a singular chain, but really networks. And so the ability to balance sustainability, the speed of supply chain operations, agility, cost, all of those things is where companies need to start changing these their way of operating their supply chain. And I think it really starts with, as a company, setting the precedent for what is important to you as a business. So what is your biggest goals, say specifically around supply chain? Maybe it's around scope 3 of emissions, maybe it's around modern slavery, maybe it's around gender diversity, maybe it's around various things. What are the most important things for your business, and what is your supply chain policy as a business? So that framework that guides your business, that beacon of light that directs your business towards where you want to go. That's probably where you start thinking about the precedents that your business is going to set, because of course you have the control of the supply chain as one of the key players in driving the way that part of the supply chain works. So your beacon of light can then help shine on your suppliers as a result by taking the relevant actions. And probably the first, or not necessarily the first, but one of those earlier actions is mapping the supply chain and understanding where are your suppliers coming from and what are all of the impacts relative to your set policy or framework around supply chain. And then creating a better way to engage your suppliers from here onwards. So how do you then set some sort of, either it's a questionnaire or onboarding process that improves the way that you onboard new suppliers or continue to work with existing suppliers, and maybe helping improve, increase the education piece and closing the gap on their awareness of where they might be impacting certain areas in a negative way through their contribution to the supply chain. So these are some of the things you can think about for that earlier piece in your supply chain, and then it will obviously lead to some bigger pieces of work around baselining your supply chain, maybe around scope 3 emissions, which is obviously a very big task, and then actually going into a detailed mapping exercise of your baseline of your supply chains, and then looking at where are the actions that need to be taken to close the gaps on the issues that are identified in your supply chain. So the key material issues that you identify, how do we close the gap? Well, that will take action, and that will take definitely time. So starting somewhere would be to, as I said, do that high level map of your supply chain and understanding your suppliers, and then looking at better ways to engage them. All of this based on a policy system that your business has committed to, essentially, as an organization, knowing what you want and what is most important to your supply chain and your contribution to the impacts can then help guide you in your further steps. So So yes, that's what I really wanted to share today. Again, I apologize for the video issues and it being frozen on my face, but hopefully you have enjoyed this session, and thank you all for joining. I can see a few of you here on LinkedIn, so thank you for your time. I very much appreciate you spending this time with me, and if you have any questions later on, feel free to ask them. I hope you have a wonderful day. And if you have asked questions and I can't see them, I'm really sorry. But I'll do my best anyways to respond if they come through. And there will be a live recording next week. That's going to be a pre-recorded session. So it's a session that I did with a group called CPA Women in Business. So that's the Chartered Practicing Accountants of Australia. So it's a really great recorded session around the financial impacts of sustainability and how that the financial impacts of climate change, and obviously the impacts on business operations and the key avenues for the financial decision makers in supporting or really avoiding the impacts of climate change. And so how do they embed a more sustainable business practice, essentially? So catch that next week. It's 12:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. It will go live through a pre-recording, but you can certainly catch the video later on replay. But otherwise, thank you for your time again, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.